It's Thursday. Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. It is February 16th. We are rapidly moving through this week. Day 4 of going 5 days a week. I have done it so far, and I think that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then it'll just become a habit at this point. So I want to thank everybody who jumps in either now or listens to me on the rebroadcast for being part of the show. My glasses are fogging up a little bit. I had to run out and do a couple of errands quickly before doing the show. So I was racing back to my house because that would just be a really bad look to miss my own showtime on week 1 of expanding this show out. We had a great live show on Tuesday. Maybe not our largest audience that we've ever had, but plenty of questions were asked, and I really appreciate it because, as you know, with these live shows, as I put my glasses back on, still not much cleaner, I don't pre-prepare a lot. Jordan Kapler asking, where are the other two cowards? I'm assuming they are at their individual residences dreaming of sugar plum fairies. I am not sure. This one is my show. I probably will have each of them on at various points. Maybe we will have a live Buckeye Weekly coming up here soon. I don't know. I know that the interplay between the three of us is always great, but this is a chance for me to get my own words in, word in edgewise, because as we know, those two have been doing shows for such a long time. They have such a great chemistry together. Sometimes I just have to interject myself into the conversation. I'm just having issues today with my glasses. Let me just fix this out. This is what happens when I race home to try and get back to do the show. But I was on Tom's show for this morning. Talked to Tony a little bit yesterday, but we have not contacted each other yet today. But the day is early. It is only 11 o'clock. As you know, my goal is to do these live shows at 11 o'clock Tuesdays and Thursdays, barring travel or Ohio State availability or things of that nature. But as I've said, this is your show. This is your opportunity to ask me questions. I'm not always going to have an answer. I'll try my best to talk through it, but there are going to be things that I can't answer either because I don't know the answer or there's not an easy answer or whatever that may be. But you guys make this show great. So, typical plug right here. If you are new to the show or just a casual viewer, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to hit that thumbs up. Be sure to hit the bell. Let me see if I have my new graphic made. There you go. Subscribe. I have an animation that I can do in recorded videos. I just haven't figured out how to drop that here on a live show. But all of that helps us out. It helps us grow the channel. And because of that, when you do that, it means that we're able to do more. So if you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. But be sure to get your questions in because, again, I have not prepared a lot going into this show. And I know people really don't want to talk about the men's basketball team. And with them playing tonight at Iowa, that's about the major thing that is going on right now in Buckeye Nation. But we'll put that aside for now. Let's talk about the Washington cancellation. Ohio State announced yesterday on Wednesday that it was backing out of its 2024-2025 contract with the University of Washington. Ohio State will pay a $500,000 buyout to get out of the deal. This will open Ohio State up to having additional home dates for out of conference games in 2024 and 2025. It's disappointing that Ohio State will not be able to play Washington, but I understand the economics behind it. And let's kind of walk through that because let's look at 2023. With the Big Ten having 9 conference games, you either have 5 at home and 4 on the road or vice versa. This is a year that Ohio State has 4 conference games at home and 5 on the road. So that's 4 home games right now at this point. And then you get the opportunity to have 3 non-conference games. Well, one of those non-conference games is at Notre Dame. So you take that and it's now 6. So Ohio State has 6 home games this year. That is not necessarily going to fill the coffers of Ohio State's athletic department with 6 home games. And I think that the very real view of that probably alerted some people in the athletic department. I don't think it just suddenly snuck up on them. Oh my goodness, we're not going to make any money this year. I mean, I don't think that that was the case, but I think it was something they were always aware of. And then the harsh reality came up. 6 home games is not enough in terms of what the economic impact is with home ticket sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they needed to make that move because 24 would have been a year where Ohio State would have had the five games at home, but then would have gone to Washington. So Ohio State would have had 7 games. 8 is kind of the sweet spot. 8 is the sweet spot to be at. I mean, you're not going to get 9. That's just not what's going to happen because if you have 5 home league games and 3 out of conference games, I tested out of math at Ohio State, but I was never really a great math student. But last time I checked, 5 plus 3 was 8, not 9. So 8 is the best chance you have of monetizing things all the way through. And of course, there's other monies that are involved, media rights deals, postseason, whatever the share is you get for going, potentially the college football playoff, etc. But you still have to look at that. So Ohio State now has the opportunity, and let's be real, you're 1 year, 2 years out in terms of scheduling is nothing. I mean, they're going to have to really be circling the wagons as a lot of schedules have already been determined 6, 7, 8 years out. My hope for Ohio State is that they don't have to go to the FCS ranks, and that's nothing against the FCS schools. That's nothing against Youngstown State. That's nothing against any of them. But if the goal is to make sure that you're getting more of a home draw, I don't know how much you're going to be able to sell tickets to Youngstown State for. I just don't, because no, sorry, sneezing. It's not going to be a marquee ticket. It's not going to be a mid-tier ticket. It's going to be ones that in the graduated price tier is going to be at the bottom. But when you do that at 102,000 times 65 is a lot better than the alternative. But now they're going to have to find a couple of teams to put in there. I mean, I could kind of go through, it's going to probably be group of 5, maybe a transitional school, somebody who's going from FCS to FBS who hasn't filled out its schedules yet. I don't know. I don't have any real insight as to the direction that Ohio State's going to go into filling those schedules. But let's add to this. There's more. And for those of you who are members of Buckeye Huddle, first of all, thank you. But who have read my story, there are a couple of other caveats that you could put here. One, there's not really a huge benefit in going to the 12-team playoff of having multiple out-of-conference marquee games. Losable games. That's what when I say out-of-conference marquee games, I'm saying games that you could potentially lose. And okay, apologies to Purdue and Iowa during the Meyer years where Ohio State managed to find a way to lose those games. But when you bring in Oregon and you have your series with Oregon, even though you only got to play one of them because of the 2020 season, and then you lose it, what are you gaining there? I mean, yes, okay, well, you sat there and you lost to a conference champion if they won the Pac-12 at that point. But there's not a benefit there, and it's not as big of a deal in 24. Ohio State has Western Kentucky and I don't remember the other, Akron or somebody like that. That's not the year, but 25, Ohio State was supposed to have Washington and Texas. And Texas will be a member of the SEC at that point. Not that suddenly everything changes for them. Just the patch on their uniform. But that's a game, those are games that you sit there and you look at and are like, wow, even though both of them would have been in Columbus, are you putting yourself in the best situation with that? So you have that. And then, of course, let's put on the conspiracy hat a little bit right here. What's to say that in a few years, Washington isn't a member of the Big Ten? Now, really moving ahead and leaping to some conclusions there. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case. But the Big Ten, already is bringing in USC and UCLA starting in 24, which is another piece to this equation. And then on top of that, there's been a lot of talk that Oregon and Washington could be part of a new expansion. I know that you could sit there and you could talk about putting Stanford or Cal or somebody into that mix. Probably it's you look at the Pac-12, you look at where it is in its expansion, which is non-existent at this point. They've gone on a couple of campus tours. San Diego State to bring back Southern California to the footprint, so to speak. SMU to try and bring in the DFW Metroplex into the footprint. That's not, I mean, that might be worth about $1.05 on in terms of what you're going to get in your conference media rights deals. Neither of those are going to necessarily excite the masses. Okay, great. You have a ton of households in Dallas, Fort Worth. You have a ton of households in San Diego. And if you're sitting there and saying that that's your entry point to getting LA, that's fine. Let's speak a little TV here. They're not in the same ADI. Just because you're on in San Diego doesn't mean ABC, it has a channel in San Diego. ABC has a channel in Los Angeles. Just because San Diego State is there doesn't mean that suddenly KABC really cares that much about San Diego State and the Pac-12 product. Now, it's kind of the only game in town out there in a lot of ways. I mean, of course, you now have the Big Ten, but there's still going to be the opportunity, and especially with the Big Ten not being on ABC, ESPN anymore, moving forward with the new rights deals, it might mean something. But for those of you who really were hoping to get out and see Seattle and go to the fish market and see the Space Needle and all of that good stuff, have faith. There's a chance that it still could happen under the backdrop of a conference game in the Big Ten, but we'll see. Where goes one? How are you doing? Bring in some Max. Well, and that's fine, but let's just, let me pull up a blank browser right here and let's go to Bowling Green. That's just the first school that came to mind. And let's see what they have in terms of future schedules. Are they all right? Here we go. epischedules.com. So 22. Let's go forward to 23. Let's go forward to 24. 24. They already have their non-conference built out, and they do 8 league games in the MAC. They got Fordham at Penn State, at Texas A&M, and Old Dominion. Now, yeah, BG could sit there and say, see Old Dominion. I'm not sure if the dates match up, and I don't think they do. But there's nothing to say that they can't back out, and their penalty is probably about $50,000. And then take, the 1.4 million, and Ohio State's probably going to have to pay up in terms of what the share is that it's going to share with a immediate, emergency team, and it's going to make a lot more money. But, we'll see. Antoine Johnson just says the Big Ten just might bring Stanford in for that research money. It's not just about football. The Big Ten loves the academic standards. And there is something absolutely, absolutely to that. And I've said that time and time again. And I wish we had a bigger audience. I didn't get this show promoted the night before, so shame on me. So hopefully this one gets rewatched a lot. I want to thank everybody who's part of the show right now. I think here in 2-3 weeks, people will get used to me doing the show, and hopefully the numbers go up. And conversely, I think as we get closer to spring ball, there's going to be more to talk about. I think a lot of people know we're in mid-February. What are we going to talk about? Well, apparently we're going to talk about conference expansion. And to Antoine's point, conference expansion is not just about football. Conference expansion is not just about athletics. There is so much more to it. And the fact that this is a decision that is made by university presidents and chancellors and not athletic directors should be your first clue, should be your first indication of that. And the Big Ten Alliance, which used to be the CIC, the Council on Institutional Cooperation or something like that, is a gold standard in terms of research dollars. And for everybody who thumbed their nose at the additions of Rutgers and Maryland, they were looking at it for the athletic side of things. Well, when you sit there and you bring the New York and the DC markets into the equation, that means a lot more and I don't have numbers in front of me. I don't think all of that is put out public. It's not anything I'm going to be trying to work on doing with FOIAs at this point. It's not that important to me. But you bring in DC where a lot of these research dollars could be assigned. You bring in New York City, which is New York City, and it's a big deal. Now, if you sit there and you go to NorCal and you go to Stanford or Cal or both, and you bring in just this powerhouse with this gigantic endowment, get your minds out of the gutter, not that type of endowment, and you with this giant endowment, that obviously helps conference prestige, that helps conference dollars. And when you have this cooperative that are all together, because let's not forget, the Big Ten has some associate members too. University of Chicago is still kind of an associate member. Johns Hopkins is part of the Big Ten in one of either men's or women's lacrosse. So I believe that they have some sort of access into the BTA. So while you may not necessarily be the Ivy League in terms of prestige, you sit there and you look at what these research dollars are and what's important to the Big Ten. And Antoine, I see your follow up, and I'll get to it in a second. What's important to the Big Ten? Being a member of, I'm drawing a blank. That's what happens. I haven't had my morning coffee right now. But being an AAU institution, which everybody in the Big Ten is except Nebraska. Nebraska was a member of AAU, joined the Big Ten, and then lost it. And I think it had either something to do with some sort of, it was either because like the university hospital was not in Lincoln, it was in Omaha, or maybe it was something ag related. I don't remember all of that off the top of my head, but the Big Ten has made it very clear what is important to it in terms of its expansion candidates. So if the Big Ten were able to pull something like that off, it would be a huge coup. Now, a lot of people sit there, and there are a lot of obvious geographical matches for the Big Ten. Oh, well, you should add this school or you should add that school. Well, if they're going to add any school that is within the footprint, it should be somebody like Pitt, because Pitt is another school that checks off a lot of the boxes. The boxes it doesn't check off are it doesn't open up any new TV markets, and that's important too. I mean, that is important too. And again, the dollars aren't necessarily the biggest issue there for that, but you sit there and then every time you add a member, that member has to be able to sustain itself. If you have a pie and you're dividing it 14 ways and everybody's getting a piece of pie, and then you divide it 16 ways and everybody's getting 80% of a piece of pie, and then you divide it 20 ways and everybody's getting 55% of a piece of pie, you're not gaining anything there. And then of course that's kind of where some of the, I accidentally punched the microphone, between the academic and the athletic side go on, because the academic side is still going to reap the benefits in terms of bringing in a school like that, whereas on athletics you're diluting what the money is you're going to get. The follow-up, not to mention the Big Ten probably wants to crack the Western and Eastern football markets. It's better for TV ratings and recruiting. Absolutely. And let's be honest, NorCal isn't necessarily a hotbed for recruiting right now in terms of football. There certainly are a couple schools up there that turn a lot of kids. We also don't hear a lot about NorCal recruiting because all those kids go to USC, Oregon, maybe Washington. So I don't really remember a lot of times that Ohio State gets involved with NorCal kids. I mean, the last time I can think of somebody who was even remotely associated with Northern California would be like Larry Grant, and that's not because he was from there, but he went to City College of San Francisco. And Larry Grant has the distinction of being somebody who's been to 4 national championship games and was not on the winning team any of those times, because he did that twice at San Francisco and did it twice with Ohio State. I want to say hi to Brandon Newsome. Hello, go Bucks to you too. But it's an interesting point, and this wasn't necessarily kind of my game plan of what I wanted to talk about, but I'm glad that Antoine brought it up, because I did think about it last night as I'm like, what the hell am I going to talk about on this show? Going live twice a week, that's a lot. I mean, just in terms of what's going on in a slow period. I guarantee you, come spring football, it's going to be a lot better with that. I'm going to start bringing guests on the show too. I've had some people reach out to me and say, "Oh, I really love it when you do the show solo and it's just your thoughts." And I mean, we can kind of see how your mind works. I said, "Yeah, poorly and slowly." But this conference expansion and conference movement and scheduling do you think that the schedule that Ohio State has out in advance for like 2030, and that's only non-conference, conference games are now, Big Ten's made a move. We'll learn the 24 schedule around October. We're not going to see things years in advance. But do you think those 2030 games are going to happen? And Antoine, I appreciate it. I would super chat you for helping me out here because I don't know what the hell to talk about. Do you think those games are absolutely going to happen? No. Some of them could happen. But what happens when we 5 years from now move into a situation of where there's really only three conferences? I still think if you expand beyond 16 teams, you should be playing 10 league games. I think you should be you're part of a conference to play against that conference. You're not part of a conference to go and play against non-conference foes. And yes, we love these huge marquee games. Give me Ohio State, Alabama during the regular season. Give me Ohio State, Florida. I mean, and Florida isn't as good as they had been in the past during the regular season. Give me Ohio State, Oklahoma during the regular season. I'm all for that. But I think that not at the cost of playing your conference less. I think that if you're a conference champion, it's because you have played as many conference games as is realistic and been the best team in your conference. What shouldn't be a determining factor is, well, this team schedules a legitimate out of conference schedule and this team schedules bubblegum. And I think all of that is very important. I want to get back here. I got a couple things here. Antoine says, by the way, I'm a Michigan fan, but I love talking college football. Antoine, I really appreciate it. I would ask you to sign up to Buckeye Huddle. Maybe you will. I don't know. We have a couple of Michigan fans over there that they're treated nicely. I promise you. I mean, it's kind of a situation if you act well, you're going to be treated well. And if you're not treated well by somebody, well, that's kind of on them for not treating you well. But we love talking college football. I love talking college football. Obviously, that is what I am doing here. That's what we're doing here. So that's important. Maybe my bubblegum comment was a little bit about Michigan's non-conference schedule. And it is what it is. Everybody has their own strategy. You got to win your games. And I think Michigan is fully capable of going out and playing a much more difficult non-conference schedule and being successful. But it is what it is. And let me pull up what Michigan's future non-conference schedules look like because I don't know. I know that I see some things getting posted every so often. Let me see FB schedules. All right, let's get here to 24. Fresno State, Texas, and Arkansas State. I'm all for that. They got the game with Texas. That's fine. And that was something that had to get flipped around as part of the Texas, Oklahoma departure of the Big 12 early. All right, 25. Let's see what we've got there. We've got New Mexico at Oklahoma, Central Michigan. So it seems like these couple of years may have been the outlier. And I think that, all right, 26, they only have one game announced, and that's Oklahoma. 27, one game announced, and that's at Texas. 28, Washington, the aforementioned Washington Huskies. And then we jump up to 2033, and there's a series that starts with Notre Dame. So where goes one? I'm going to get back to yours here in a second. There's no need to schedule hard out-of-conference games if you have the Big Ten to go through. Besides, losing a hard non-con game will hurt you more than it helps you the way college football is currently. And I agree almost the whole way. There is something to it, though. And I think some of that's going to be negated by moving to the 12-team playoff. And I think having that non-con game out there is a little bit of a tiebreaker in the eyes of the committee. Now, if you lose it, that certainly doesn't help. But I think that having that, it helps differentiate you from other teams that may have a very similar resume. If you've gone out and you've beaten the Big 12 champion, I think that helps you more than if you have a schedule that is, I don't know, Coastal Carolina. Well, Coastal Carolina, I shouldn't pick on them anymore. FIU, FAU, and Southern Miss. I think that a non-con schedule like that is not going to look as well as somebody who goes out there and plays against a team with a pulse. And now, if you lose, that's bad. Going to 12-team playoff, we only see one, two, maybe three undefeated teams at the end of the year. So we're going to have a field that's going to have what, 9, 10, 11 teams that have at least a loss, probably a couple of 2-loss teams. So I don't know if there's as much benefit of scheduling those difficult games. But I think it's important too to see kind of where you stand, to see how you match up against other tough competition, a team that you don't see year in and year out, or 2 out of every 5 years, or whatever you have there. Now, my idea is move some of those non-conference games into the middle of the season. I was not a huge fan of Ohio State drawing Notre Dame week 1. Now, it did help Ohio State more because Ohio State was bringing back more known quantities than Notre Dame. But I think if you're going to play those games, you should play them once you've kind of figured some stuff out. I think that's important. I think this year for Ohio State, it's important that they play Notre Dame week 4. Whoever the starting quarterback is, be it Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, will have 3 starts under their belt, barring something crazy happening. The offensive line will have 3 starts under their belt, barring something crazy happening. So there's something to be said with that. But let me jump back here to where goes one. Which second-year players will show out this season on defense? And that's a good question. I think the first one, and we can get back to conference expansion and scheduling and everything here. I really appreciate Antoine helping me carry the show here as I've been waiting for some questions to come in. Sonny Styles is going to be my first name. And I think that is like the lowest of low-hanging fruit. Wow, Kevin, way to go out on a limb for that one. Sonny Styles played very early in the Peach Bowl against Georgia. Now, he was in there when Darnell Washington was in, the jumbo tight end for the Bulldogs. And then he got hurt and we didn't see as much Sonny Styles. But I think you're going to have more of an opportunity now with another offseason. Because remember, Sonny Styles, he had to take every last second he could to be able to graduate early. He gets in the summer, but he didn't have the benefit of a spring. I think once you get that opportunity, I think he can really move forward. I think it's going to take some forward thinking by the coaching staff to figure out what he is. Safety, linebacker. Is he somebody that you just have to maybe have some 4-3 out there and have him kind of as a Pete Werner, combo linebacker nickel type guy? I don't know on there. Other guys that I think that could step up, I'd really like to see Caden Curry step up. We saw flashes out of him on the defensive line. I think he's another player that has to be in the rotation. He's not going to get any taller, but he's still disruptive. He still makes plays happen. So I think that I think he's somebody there. It's a little bit early to be able to judge some of the other defensive linemen, be it Hero Kanu or Omari Abor or Kenyatta Jackson. I think I think Ohio State having somebody on the edge stepping up would be huge. I think that Ohio State having another edge rusher, if they're going to insist upon rotating the way they are, and we're not going to see JT Tuimoloau out there as much as a lot of people feel he needs to, they need to have somebody else that is going to help in that rotation. At linebacker, I still think it's the Steele and Tommy show there. Obviously you'd like to see a CJ Hicks step up, maybe see something more out of Gabe Powers. I think they're guys that certainly have a lot of upside. But in order to be able to show out the season, you have to have a spot. And that has to be either a case of you're walking into a spot or you have to wrestle time away from somebody who holds the spot. And I think that that's one of the biggest questions there. How about somebody like Jair Brown at corner? Could he sit there and could it be Denzel Burke and Jair Brown as your corners? I mean, could he beat out Davison Igobison and Jordan Hancock? I mean, you just don't know where is the opportunity going to be. But I do like putting Jair Brown in that mix as well. Um, Odysseus 2002, Tyleek Williams needs to have a monster year. Absolutely. Absolutely. Tyleek and Mike Hall both need to really step up, and I think they need to be free to do a little bit more out there. Cowtown Customs, I'm looking forward to the season. Kyle leading us to a natty, and he is one and done. Well, if he's the starter, he's, natty or not, he might be one or done. His clock will have reached the point of where he could go. And I've always said, and this is not my thought originally, but I've latched onto it. 1-year starters in college don't necessarily translate well into the league, and it's just reality. It's just the reality of the fact. But would Kyle play too if he ends up winning out the position? I don't know. I mean, Devin Brown has 2 years. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, unless he were to transfer. I mean, but I don't think you transfer out of Ohio State after starting a year if he wins the job. But a lot of expectations, a lot of hopes. We have so much time between now and the start of September. Ohio State at Indiana to open up the season. It's going to be a good time out there in Bloomington. When we get closer, we'll kind of go through some places to see when you're in Bloomington. Made the trip out there multiple times, but we'll see. I want to get back to Antoine here. He got a couple comments. I know you Buckeyes are used to your 5-star recruits, but there's something to be said for 3 stars that stay the duration. Ohio State will have to face a veteran Michigan team every year. And then to follow that up, it's like dealing with a veteran team almost every 4 years, Buckeyes. But meanwhile, your 5-star players will probably leave in 2 years, and your turnover rate might not allow you to catch up with experience. There's a lot to unpack here, because I do think that there's something to be said about players who play 4 years. I think that certainly helps a team, a known quantity, somebody who can continue to get better. Now, don't max out. If you max out as a sophomore and you don't get any better and you can't be replaced by somebody better, that can be a little bit of a brick wall. I think we're seeing right now with Michigan, in terms of these last couple years, that their roster lined up very well to be very competitive. And they do have a lot of these multi-year players on the roster. Now, if we were to sit there and to question Jim Harbaugh, would you rather have a bunch of 3s who stick around for a while, or would you rather have a bunch of 5s that lead to more 5s? Because we know that that's just how it works. Offers breed offers, and 5 stars breed 5 stars. I think he'd probably want to have some 5 stars out there, and Michigan does. I mean, Will Johnson's incredible. I really like Will Johnson. I think that Ohio State had the tallest of uphill battles to try and land him, and it wasn't going to happen. But I like Will Johnson a lot, and I think Michigan will get some of these types of players, especially guys within the footprint. But what is? I think we look at what Michigan is doing. Michigan's also performing well in the portal, and that has nothing to do with 4-year players. I mean, the player themselves might be 4 years, but they might be 1 year, 2-year rentals at Michigan because they're coming by way of the portal. So I don't think it's all a matter of recruiting 3-star guys. I think part of it too is, I mean, Michigan has managed to maintain a fantastic offensive line, and that's been by way of the portal. I think that there's been some good development. I think that, in terms of recruiting, and I think all of that is very important to the situation. But I don't think that the tide is going to turn because Ohio State has quicker turnover than Michigan does. I don't think that is going to be the instance. I think that right now we've just seen a little bit of a logjam of players that have just played above their ranking, all being at Michigan at the same time. I ask you this, Antoine, what is Michigan going to look like post JJ McCarthy at quarterback? JJ's not the most talented thrower. He's a really good runner, Kid's a winner though, and that's something to be said. The kid is a winner, and I think that that is part of the intangible that we don't talk about enough about a kid being a winner. But what does quarterback recruiting look like there? Okay, running back recruiting has been fine. Blake Corum obviously had a huge impact last year. Donovan Edwards obviously torched Ohio State on a couple of plays. I think that it's going to be a tremendous 1-2 punch next year. But then what? I mean, you go and you get a 3-star, and then you hope that they go and last for 4 years, and maybe that 3-star's on the roster right now being developed. I don't think that it's a case of where you can just wave a wand and say, well, this is the case because it's always been the case. It's up to every individual player to get there. Blake Corum works his ass off in the weight room. I mean, he is a weight room freak. Donovan Edwards is just blessed with a lot of God-given abilities. And, I'm sure he works his ass off as well. So I don't know. I agree with I agree with certain aspects of what you're saying there, but I don't know if I agree with it at its root point. And let me see, because I know we had some comments in here. The COVID cycle exacerbated the eligibility of some guys, and that played out in the last few years. After that, I would be concerned about recruiting carrying the water. Carl Sagasser, I agree with you there. I think, as I said, a little bit of a log jam. I think that there's a log jam of guys that are there, and Michigan is certainly benefiting from it. And Ohio State went through the same COVID cycle and everything else, but it is what it is. And I'm not here. I'm not a win denier. I'm not going to say that the Michigan win in 22 didn't happen and the Michigan win in 21 didn't happen. They absolutely happened. Ohio State, for whatever reason, was not the better team on the field either of those years. But I look at Michigan's average recruiting right now, and it feels a little bit unsustainable. It feels a little bit unsustainable with what the classes are that they're getting. Now, having worked for Rivals for 16, 17 years, I guess I was there for 17 years. I had to defend recruiting rankings a lot. That was part of the business. The guys out there doing the rankings were my friends. I mean, I defended it a lot, but recruiting rankings are far from infallible. And I think that if you get any recruiting guy aside, they're going to sit there and say that. So maybe some of these 3-stars will come back and realize that they were probably a little bit better. But Michigan hasn't exactly been tearing it up on the recruiting trail. Michigan, for whatever reason, has not necessarily recruited Ohio the way they did under Lloyd Carr. Now, Michigan goes into Ohio, gets Rod Moore, who proves to be a pretty good kid. So it does work a little bit. But when the series was a lot more even, or tilted in the wrong direction, let's put it that way, for Ohio State fans, Michigan was coming into Ohio and recruiting a lot of guys. Now, I think a lot of it, too, is equated by the fact that Ohio, for the last few years, not as deep. I think 24 and 25 are going to be different. I'll be curious to see what Jim Harbaugh's strategy is if they do recruit Ohio more. I mean, they seem to really love recruiting the New England states. And I lived in New Hampshire for a couple years, and I watched New Hampshire high school football. My high school went to the state championship game both years that I was there, because I moved there as a junior, won it one year and lost in the championship game the other year. Wasn't the greatest football I'd ever seen. I mean, granted, I wasn't around college football the way I am today, but I just don't know how it's sustainable. So we'll see. And I'll be interested in talking about this in a couple years. Good Lord willing that we're all doing this, and that okay, I was wrong. They were able to sustain it. It wasn't because of a logjam because of COVID. It wasn't just because of a couple special kids. There's something to it. Or conversely, it was, well, COVID really kind of helped them in a lot of ways. They didn't have to take that beating that was coming in 2020 because they didn't have anybody healthy, and Ohio State was like 5,000 times better than them that year. And then it backs up the players, giving them the COVID year and everything else. So, we'll see. And Antoine agrees that COVID did start something. But, it's interesting to see who was the last 4-year quarterback starter for OSU. Well, JT Barrett. If somebody is your starting quarterback for 4 years, Is it because they are just this incredible quarterback, or because maybe they're just a collegiate quarterback and they don't translate to the league? And I think we're talking about JT Barrett there. I don't think JT Barrett was somebody who was going to translate well to the league. Now he's coaching. Now he's got an assistant job with the Lions. He's been in the Lions organization for a couple of years. Really happy for him. But did anybody here think that JT Barrett was going to be any sort of, as a cat joins me, any sort of major threat in the National Football League? Again, I didn't sit there and I didn't watch Pat Mahomes in college and say, "Oh my God, this guy is going to be incredible in the NFL." Now, maybe with somebody like Joe Burrow during his senior seasons, like, well, this kid's pretty damn good. So you don't know, but I mean, JT Barrett was who he was, and that was a quarterback who was a tremendous leader and very smart and a tremendous runner and could throw when he needed to. And nobody's going to deny the quarter of football he put up against Penn State at Ohio Stadium when he led the Buckeyes back in, one of those huge comeback type of games. But, I don't know. I don't know if there's a huge I don't know if I want a 4-year starter at quarterback if I'm Ohio State. If I'm Indiana, sure, I want a 4-year starter. That would be great. But if I'm Ohio State, if I'm Alabama, if I'm Michigan, I don't want a 4-year starter because I don't see a situation of where that's great. Maybe 1 out of 100 times it's great when it's just, this kid is an amazing college quarterback. Amazing, but he doesn't have the size, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. He's able to get it all done. But normally it just means that, well, the reason the league isn't knocking is because the league isn't knocking, and that's why he's going to be there 4 years. So I don't know. Carl Sagasser, OSU will be built to beat the SEC. That won't change. And that's something that I have talked about as well, that we saw Jim Tressel have to kind of make a little bit of an adjustment toward the end of his coaching career with the Buckeyes. Ohio State was built to win the Big Ten and was not necessarily built to win those BCS championship games. And that's nothing against Jim Tressel. I mean, and it's when you sat there and you had a class that was 25 guys and 13 were from Ohio and the other 12 were from Indiana, Pennsylvania, and maybe a couple from Florida. Ohio State was dominating the Big Ten, but it wasn't necessarily in a great position to win against the SEC or in the BCS. So, I don't know. But Ohio State has to find a way to be built to beat the SEC and built to beat Michigan too, because Michigan is still going to be this hurdle at the end of the season. And we already kind of saw what it would look like if Ohio State loses to Michigan, doesn't win the Big Ten, and then goes to the CFP. And there were a lot of people who were very disappointed. I guarantee you none of those disappointed people ducked watching the Peach Bowl. But I think that all of those things have to be there to keep Ohio State fans happy. Odysseus, bringing in James Laurinaitis and promoting a Heartline to OC may be to flip the rivalry. They both know how to beat Michigan. It's all well and good, but it's a matter of what happens on the field. I mean, you can coach these guys up 6 ways from Sunday. I mean, that's fine, but it's a matter of executing. I think having people that understand the rivalry is great. I always enjoyed when Earl Bruce was still with us. Earl telling his Michigan stories during Michigan week and everything else, and knowing he was going in and talking to the team, and 90% of the team's like, who the hell's this old guy? But I mean, he was so impassioned with it. I think all of that is important. I think that's something that's going to help Ohio State is being more balanced on offense. I think maybe not going all out, gambling on a couple plays on defense, and maybe having some healthy running backs. And again, as I said on another show, Michigan didn't have Blake Corum last year. He went like a series and it wasn't good. And Mayan Williams went like maybe 2 series and it wasn't good. So neither team had one of their A, and for Ohio State, I'd say like 1 and 1A between him and Henderson running backs. But I think that if Ohio State is relatively healthy, is able to sit there and be a little bit more balanced on offense and doesn't sit there and go cover 0 at some really dumb times, that Ohio State's going to do just fine. And that's my view, and I'm sure that I'm looking at it through my own, my own tinted glasses, but that's kind of how I see it. We're going to kind of get through some more questions as I'm falling behind. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Another small crowd, but you guys are really bringing it with the questions. That's the energy I like to see. Matthew Miller, there are two quarterbacks in Ohio that are good. Ryan Montgomery will be a stud, I think. I think Ryan Montgomery, I really wish that I saw Findlay run more of a wide open offense. But my hopes don't really matter. Kid's got the measurables. He's got some time. He's class of 25. We really need to see there. There's a 26 that I really like, as I've talked about before, and that's Rocco Williams out of Pickerington. When I sit there and talk about a kid being my neighbor because he's from Pickerington, that's one thing. He is legitimately my neighbor. We share. We're not allowed to have fences in our neighborhood because of the HOA. We legitimately share a backyard space. So he's somebody to watch in 26. Already has some offers. He's somebody I'm looking forward to seeing camping at Ohio State. There are some other solid quarterbacks within the state as well, but we'll see there. Follow up from Matthew. I'm not sure McCord wins the job. Maybe Devin Brown, but I hope McCord plays up to potential and hits his ceiling. It could be another first round quarterback. I'm not sold on who the starter is going to be either. And that's because we've seen so little of them. At least with McCord, we can go back a couple of years and watch the Akron game. Now we're also watching a young Hal McCord at that point, in a pretty basic offense of, let's not put this kid in a bad situation and ruin him by having him go out and having him making a lot of difficult throws that are highly contested and set him back 6 months because we overdid it. I think Devin Brown is really capable. I think Kyle McCord is really capable. It's going to be exciting. And spring practice will be here before we know it. Brad Smith, COVID saved Jim's job, if we're being honest, going back to Ann Arbor 0-6 against Ohio State after a 70-10 butt whooping after already taking the pay cut would have ended up with Harbaugh fired. I don't know if it would end up with Harbaugh fired, but I think it might have ended up with Harbaugh saying, deuces, I'm out of here. I'm not enjoying this. And that's not saying that Harbaugh's a quitter. I don't want to be misrepresented like that. But at some point, how many times can you beat your head against a wall? I think 2020 could have been really bad for Michigan, really bad. And I think Michigan could have gone in with its roster, with its regular roster, not this COVID. We have no quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think Ohio State still would have probably put a substantial whooping on them in that game, but it didn't happen, and it is what it is, and it can be the punchline for a lot of jokes now, but it's history, and there's no changing it. There's no getting back into the Wayback Machine and playing the 2020 game. There's no simulating it. There's no going in and seeing what the ramifications would have been. But I think that, along with Brad's point, if that game would have been played, we wouldn't have seen 21-22 Michigan, not by a long shot. I think that things would have gotten very uncomfortable up there. Antoine Johnson, Michigan is built for power. OSU is built for speed. Even your defensive line is built to pass rush because Ohio State never intends on being behind your defensive line. Is athletic but very thin. We're seeing Ohio State move to some bigger one techs. Caden McDonald, an incoming freshman, is that big body that we haven't seen. I mean, yes, we've seen some big guys with, Tyleik Williams is a big guy, but when I see Caden McDonald, I see kind of like a Jonathan Hankins. And I think that that's going to be very exciting. I'll be interested to see what kind of changes come out of the shortcomings that developed last year. I don't think you're going to see Ohio State try to reinvent the wheel. I don't think you're going to see them change things like dramatically, but there have to be some changes. And I think the reality is too, Ohio State knows what it's going to face against Michigan next year. They already know that it's going to be a steady dose of Corum smashing into you, and then probably a little bit of outside play with Donovan Edwards. And JJ McCarthy can get out there and run around. I'm not necessarily sold on the Michigan receivers. I say that every year. And then Cornelius Johnson and, these guys sit there and play well above their pay grade, in my opinion. And I spend the next 360 some days trying to explain where I was wrong. But I'm looking forward to that game, but I'm not here to pass up the first 11 games of the season. Let's let that have a slow build. Last year of the 14 team Big Ten, the last year of the 4-team college football playoff. I'm very excited about all that. Antoine, again, Ohio State may have to change up its defensive line. Even looks like even your defensive tackles look like defensive ends. That's why Michigan was able to run the ball on you. Again, I talked about Caden McDonald. I'm not putting too much pressure on a true freshman lineman, but I think that he's somebody that's a difference maker. I think we need to see more Mike Hall. I think we need to see more Tyleik Williams. I think they need to sit there and clog up the middle a little bit more. That's not me talking bad about players who are not on the roster anymore, but I've said it once and I'll say it again. I was puzzled by some of the sets that they had out there. Is this a case of trying to equate snaps, or is this a case of trying to win the damn game? And I think that if you're trying to win the damn game, you need to sit there and make sure your best players are out there in the most pivotal points. The point that you can make on the other side of that is that the points, maybe some of the times that the players that were not the ones were out there turned into pivotal points because they didn't make the plays. So I don't know. We got a few more things here as we're closing in on 50 some minutes, and then we'll take this about an hour, and then we'll call it a show. I will go tape a show for Friday as well that we will have at some point during the day, and then we re-rack it and start it again next week, and we will do Monday, Wednesday, Friday taped, and Tuesday, Thursday live. Matthew Miller. We have top 5 D-line coming back in college football, in all of college football. Number 1 wide receiver rotation, top 5 running back room, good linebackers, and I think our secondary will be way better with transfers and Sonny Styles back there. We'll see what Jihad Carter, with Davison Igboson. I still need to get a real pronunciation there. So if you're watching, Davison, I apologize if I am butchering your last name. I think that there's a lot of reasons to be excited about what the defense can be. Now, you can sit there and have all of these players. If you go out there and you're running cover 0 at the most inopportune time, that's a problem. I think that Jim Knowles is going to have to do a little bit of an evaluation of some of his aggressiveness on defense. If Ohio State is in a position, and that's not me saying go out and play prevent, prevents the win, as the old saying goes. I don't want to see that, but I also don't want to see them sell out in a situation of where you don't need to. I don't want to see 3rd and long and you just sit there and you send everybody and their brother, and it's, a simple pitch and catch out there. And before you know it, instead of leading a game, you're trailing a game, or instead of leading a game, you're tied. I don't think there's any reason for that. And I think that Jim Knowles, you don't coach for as long as he has without making some adjustments along the way. It's not going to get any easier for you Buckeyes. The problem is you guys just see star ratings as opposed to position fit. Y'all recruit well, but you only recruit receivers and quarterbacks. Yes and no. I think that part of Ohio State's top 5 recruiting class last year is the fact that they recruited 4 awesome receivers, and that certainly inflates the rankings. But Ohio State certainly recruits well. Jermaine Matthews, Calvin Simpson-Hunt at corner are going to be names you're going to hear for a while. Ohio State, let me pull up the 23 class. I've already moved on to 24. How sad is that? That's just how quickly things work around here. Football recruiting commitment list. Let's take a look at that. 23. All right. Let's talk about just in the trenches. I think that when you look at the offensive line, Josh Padilla, Austin Sareveld, Luke Montgomery, Miles Walker, I think that Luke Montgomery certainly is probably my top end player out of that group. But I think that you have some guys there that are going to, I think you're not going to see a case of where Ohio State is constantly missing at offensive line recruiting, circa Greg Studrara, where Ohio State would land a Paris Johnson, but then would miss out on its other 3 top targets. So I think that's an issue. Let's look at defensive line. I've already talked about Caden McDonald inside. Jason Moore, very interesting hybrid type of player. Is he an edge? Is he an end? Is he a interior player? I think you're going to hear about him a lot. I think Joshua Mickens, the Indianapolis player who was going to go to LSU, who Ohio State flipped. I think he's somebody who didn't get talked about enough. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he got on Ohio State's board so late. And then, of course, you have a legacy in Will Smith Jr., true defensive tackle. I think Ohio State is going to be just fine. Um, I understand what you're saying, and I understand what the appearances are. I'm probably in a little bit of a different position because I cover this stuff and I see these players and I've seen them at camp and I've talked to them and I kind of know what they're getting. But there's something to be said about it. But it's not as if Ohio State came out there and was absent from playing defense. Okay, giving up as many points as it did against UGA certainly was an issue. Giving up as many points as it did against Michigan was an issue. But I think we saw Ohio State take some steps forward, and I think we'll see a lot more here in year two. I'm gonna skip a couple as we go along. It's not because I don't like the questions, but I just want to make sure that I get us to a nice round hour or so. Matthew Miller, Tyreek and Mike Hall and Caden Curry will break out. We have the best linebackers coming back. I'm interested to see what Tommy Eichenberg looks like without having both hands essentially wrapped up. Tommy played through a lot of injuries last year. Hopefully for Ohio State's fortunes, he and Steele both pick up where they left off. Antoine here, if Ohio State's smart, they would lean on their running game a little bit more this year, especially with a rookie quarterback. But little Day is going to start scratching that beard. I hear you. I think that we need to see more out of the offensive line. It's going to be interesting because you're replacing your center and two tackles. What is that going to look like? That you're bringing back Matt Jones. You're bringing back Donovan Jackson. Does Vic Cutler go to center? Who are going to be your tackles? But I think you need to make more of an effort to be able to run and not run against Western Kentucky and Youngstown State. Run against Penn State, Notre Dame, Michigan, etc. You've got to be able to do that. It was maddening for all Ohio State watchers to watch what happened on 3rd and 2 and their inability to run. And I talked about it on another show, probably on the Tuesday live show. So sorry that I'm repeating myself. If you're not, whoever the starting quarterback is, if you're not going to practice him under center, then practice the other quarterback under center. Bring in your Tim Tebow bulldozer to get you convert on 3rd and 1. I don't want to hear the excuse, well, we don't practice under center. Well, you know how you remedy that? Practice under center. Simple. I don't like seeing plays starting 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, 6 yards behind the line to gain, to try and get that in a situation when you're not necessarily always the most consistent short yardage running team. I think that you need to get there and get that push, get behind. If this is the interior line of Jones, Cutler, and Jackson, get behind them and get that first down and keep the chains moving. I think that running the ball is very important. Now, Antoine, I'm sure you're enough of a college football fan to remember that before Dwayne Haskins era, Ohio State fans just were like, why can't we throw the damn ball? Why can't we throw it more? Well, now we're in a situation, Ohio State throws the ball too much. They need to be able to run it. So apparently there's never going to be a perfect ratio for that. As another cat jumps up here to bother me. There's never going to be a perfect ratio for any of that, but they need to be a little bit more consistent there. Mark A. Lewis Jr., Ohio State's going to be okay. One thing we're great and have been for a long time is reloading and making our youth have early success. Michigan is overrated, and TCU showed that. I'm going to say the TCU game was kind of a weird case study. I don't think that we necessarily can make any huge proclamations about Michigan because of that, but I think Ohio State certainly could go back and watch that game and be like, what the hell happened when we played them? What the hell happened? Both these teams, according to SP Plus, are They're 2-3 in SP plus. Both of them have a ceiling of 12-0, have a floor of like 9-3. Both these teams are going to be very heavily involved in the Big Ten and the national race. So we'll see. We'll see how Ohio State does in its reloading process. That's always so important. And Michigan's going to be bringing back a lot. And will Ohio State be able to finally, solve that riddle that has gotten out of its been out of its grasp for the last couple of years? But Antoine doesn't agree with Mark, says that's a dumb statement, Mark, because if we're overrated, well, then you are vastly overrated. Michigan just played sloppy and still had the chance to win. Well, every game is a game into itself. It is, it's not a case of where the transitive property doesn't work in sports. It's, oh, well, you lost to them, so you should lose to them because of it. It's none of that is there. And remember, this is an Ohio State partisan show. So fans are not going to say a lot of nice things about your rooting interest school, but it is what it is. Let me see. Wow, things are going here. Maybe I should do the show at 12, or maybe I should just plan on doing 2 hours. I just can't. I can't do it today. Chad Stryker asking any thoughts on Air Nolan's visit this weekend. I haven't really talked anything about the recruiting at this point. I need to kind of circle back with Mark and Alex and kind of see what's going on. I've been really kind of focused on getting this show back running to where it needs to be 5 days a week. So I haven't paid a ton of attention to that, but Air Nolan's certainly a very intriguing quarterback prospect out there as Ohio State looks to put a 24 quarterback in the class out after obviously losing the commitment of Dylan Raiola a few months ago. So that's there. Matt Miller's hoping that Ohio State lands Air Noland. I mean, I think there's a lot of time, and if there are positions that I would be really unconcerned about Ohio State's recruiting in the sense of Ohio State, worrying Ohio State's not going to land somebody that's nice, and that would be wide receiver and quarterback. I think they're going to be just fine there. Whether it's Air Noland, whether it's Jaden Davis, who I know Michigan fans hate hearing me mention him being a potential candidate for Ohio State. I mean, he seemed all but locked up there. Maybe slowed down a little bit. You got Colin Hurley, who's committed to LSU. There are a lot of names out there. You've got Adrian Posse, who is committed to Auburn, I believe, who's out of South Florida. I think they're going to be just fine right there. Let me kind of keep going on. I'm trying to keep this show as non-controversial as possible as we're here at the end of it. Here's Justin Courtney. All right. Well, I guess you're a psychic and know what would have happened in all games that didn't come to fruition. I deal in the known. And the known is that Michigan beat OSU by 22 on their own field. Again, I'm not a win denier. I know what happened. Let's also say this. If we're going to be honest, let's be honest. And it was an 8-point game in the fourth or whatever, and a couple of big busts when Ohio State had to kind of like sell out, led to 2 Donovan Edwards touchdowns. That doesn't mean those touchdowns don't count. That doesn't mean those points don't count. But not all 22-point margins are the same. Or not. I know that was to Mark, Justin. Not all 22-point margins are the same. I think if you sit there and you watch that entire game, I think it's all right. Maybe we say it's 15. But I mean, regardless, Michigan won the game. As much as that pains anybody here to hear, as much as, deep down, nobody wants to talk about it. Michigan won the game, and it is what it is. But I think that sitting there and saying, 22, 22, 22, yes, that was the final margin, but that wasn't necessarily the course of the game. But it's, it is what it is. Ohio State just, for whatever reason, got stuck in reverse offensively in the second half. I remember watching the game at halftime, and Ohio State was up, and I was just like, they're not going to be able to sustain what's going on. And there we go. And yes, Justin, I know it doesn't pain you. I know we have some Michigan fans that like to frequent the show. As long as it keeps the numbers up, I'm all for it. And as long as you don't speak in King Bronco Pig Latin, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. I'm gonna go one more comment, and then we're gonna call the show. I want to go get some lunch. I'm gonna go get some Skyline chili. So wish me luck with that. Matt Miller, never will you bums 3P. We will be back with another whole defense and all the skill talent back, plus some plug and play, a few pieces. We will be back at the door knocking for another natty. Well, we'll kind of leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. We have umpteen million more shows to talk about Ohio State, Michigan. I'll probably get a Michigan expert on probably coming out of spring, and we'll kind of do a live show there, kind of make it a joint show. I haven't really just kind of spitballing here, but I think people would have a little bit of fun with that, to just hear a little bit of back and forth between myself and another analyst who covers the Wolverines, and of course have a bunch of fans come in and take shots at both of us. But we will see how that goes. But once again, I want to thank everybody for watching. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, hit that thumbs up. All of that helps us out tremendously. If you're an Ohio State fan, or even if you're a Michigan fan, check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. That's my day job. That's how I make a living. This is part of the job, but Buckeye Huddle is how I make a living. So your support over there would mean the world to me. Check us out, all the best team and recruiting coverage and a fantastic community, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But until we meet again, which again will be a recorded show on Friday, and then we will go live on Tuesday, I want to wish everybody a happy Thursday, and we will talk to you all very soon.